Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Mary Oken, and I am the Assistant Director of Living New Deal, and it's my delight to welcome you to CETA, Forgotten Federally Funded Artists, Impact on Arts and Community, the last of 3 webinars hosted this month on the interconnections between the New Deal and CETA. 2024 represents the 90th anniversary of the first New Deal arts projects, and 2024 is also the 50th anniversary of CETA funding for the arts, 2 major milestones in the history of American art, followed by exponential growth in art production that offer models for what is possible when the federal government supports the arts. Spoiler, when the federal government supports artists, society is enriched by an art world that is more experimental, more diverse, and certainly more community engaged. If you're new to Living New Deal, we are a nonprofit organization of national scope that documents, maps, and teaches about New Deal history, primarily through our website, which is an open access archive and educational resource featuring a dynamic and searchable map of almost 19,000 New Deal sites, which you can visit at www.livingnewdeal.org. With the help of volunteers and donors, we are creating and maintaining the largest inventory of New Deal public works and artworks in the country. In the absence of a scholarly journal, an art museum, or an institute devoted to studying and sharing the New Deal's vast impact on American culture, our website and public programs, including tonight's webinar, regularly share and promote new research and perspectives on New Deal history and its legacies, among them CETA funding for the arts. The New Deal shaped individual artists' careers, but it also created influential institutions and social networks that continue to shape the art world for decades. Similarly, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, or CETA, funding for the arts, created institutions and relationships among them that have persisted for decades. This webinar will share with you how CETA-funded arts projects affected communities, enhancing the art experience in local public schools and neighborhoods. It will also examine the impact of CETA on creating and inspiring arts nonprofit organizations, carrying the CETA legacy, often unacknowledged, into the present. And now, without any further ado, let me introduce tonight's speakers. It is my honor to co-organize and co-host this webinar series with mixed media sculptor Virginia Maximovich and artist photographer Blaise Tobia. They were both CETA artists in New York, became artist educators at Franklin and Marshall and Drexel universities, respectively, and have been volunteering their time as co-coordinators of the CETA Arts Legacy Project, which has a website that we will post in the chat and that I encourage you to explore. Through Virginia and Blaise, I've had the pleasure to meet and get to know Ted Berger, a vocal advocate for artists and arts organizations who has spent his career focusing on the needs of individual artists, the importance of arts funding, the necessity for arts education and lifelong learning in the arts, and responsibilities and responsiveness to equity, diversity, and inclusion. In his work developing numerous arts and cultural and advocacy initiatives over the last 50 years, he often focuses on the centrality of living artists and the arts to society. He has led and consults for numerous organizations, most recently Creatives Rebuild New York. Our second speaker is Lou Bellamy, the founder and artistic director emeritus of Penumbra Theatre Company in St. Paul, Minnesota. Bellamy earned a BA in psychology and sociology at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and an MA in theater arts at the University of Minnesota. An OB award-winning director and accomplished actor, he taught at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Theater Arts and Dance from 1979 until his retirement as an associate professor in 2011. In 1976, Bellamy founded Penumbra with a $125,000 CETA grant, enabling him to employ a standing company of 20 actors. Since that time, Penumbra has evolved into one of America's premier theaters dedicated to dramatic exploration of the African-American experience. Under Bellamy's leadership, Penumbra has grown to be the largest theater of its kind in America, producing countless world premieres, including August Wilson's first professional production. Penumbra went on to produce more of Wilson's plays than any other theater in the world. Today, under the leadership of Sarah Bellamy, his daughter, Penumbra is evolving into its next life cycle, a performing arts campus and center for racial healing that nurtures Black artists, advances equity, and facilitates wellness for individuals and community. I thank all of our speakers, and we'll turn it over to Blaise and Virginia now. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to go into our shared screen here.
Okay. One more thing we have to do on our end is in all 3 webinars, every time we've done this, everybody's picture shows up over my text. Okay, so I just moved you off. Okay, I'll begin. And I want to begin with a short intro for those of you who weren't on an earlier webinar. The Comprehensive Employment and Training Act was, from 1974 to 1982, the largest program of its type outside of the New Deal. Overall, it provided short-term employment to well over 1 million people. Among these, about 2% were artists and arts professionals. That's 20,000 people, a very large number in terms of government support of the arts. And Blaise and I were 2 of them. However, unlike the New Deal programs, CETA was highly decentralized. Money came from the federal government in block grants to local authorities. This structure and how it worked were discussed in detail in part 1 of this webinar, which, as Mary said, you can access on the Living New Deal website or its YouTube channel.
The particular project we worked for was the Cultural Council Foundation Artist Project in New York City. In the period 1978 to 80, it employed 325 artists across all disciplines and was managed by 50-plus artist administrators and office staff. We worked 4 days a week in community settings and 1 day per week on our own creative projects. We were paid $10,000 a year, a very respectable salary for artists at that time, which would be about $55,000 in 2024 dollars, and received health insurance and vacation time. Four other relatively large CETA-funded projects were also set up in New York City, independent of CCF, each with about 50 artists. One was Hospital Audiences. Another was the Theater for the Forgotten, which worked with the prison system. As well, there was La Mama ETC, the Innovative Theater Company, and the American Jewish Congress. All of these groups benefited from expanded funding and staffing and were able to continue independently for a long time after CETA was terminated.
Our 2-year stint in CETA certainly benefited us individually as artists, providing us with an early career boost that proved invaluable. The same is true for most of the other artists who worked in the project, which we'll return to soon. But on a larger scale, CETA funding had a great impact on arts institutions, especially community arts groups and other cultural nonprofits. The CCF CETA project brought on several existing organizations as subcontractors: the Association of American Dance Companies, the Association of Hispanic Arts, the Black Theater Alliance, the Brooklyn Philharmonia, the Foundation for Independent Video and Film, and Jazzmobile. Some of these groups still operate today, more than 40 years later, although sometimes under a different name.
Another subcontractor under CCF was the Foundation for the Community of Artists, which represented artists on important issues and made health insurance available. It also published a monthly journal, originally called Artworkers News, and later renamed Art and Artists. The FCA oversaw the CCF project's documentation unit of 3 photographers, 3 writers, and an archivist, of which I was a part. The placement of CCFC to artists also had a positive impact on many cultural nonprofits during the project. In some cases, such as the two we worked for, the benefits have continued. In my second year with CETA, I photographed Victorian houses for the Richmond Hill Historical Society. They are still using my photographs on their website.
I worked as part of a 10 CETA artist team that helped convert a former school building at 111 Willoughby Street into a cultural center. Called Baca Downtown, it operated for several decades as a focus for Brooklyn's visual and performing artists, and in the slide, you can see some of the names. In 2022, the building was demolished to make room for a 40-story residential tower.
We know that this pattern of expanding the funding and staffing of community groups and cultural nonprofits took place all over the country. A major example, as detailed for us by Judy Baca in last week's webinar, is Spark, which received major CETA funding during its first 2 years in support of the Great Wall Project. Spark is going stronger than ever, and the Great Wall is being restored and expanded, having been positioned by CETA to attract private funders like the Mellon Foundation. San Francisco's Neighborhood Arts Program, as described by John Kriebler in Webinar 1, had been the very first group to hire artists with CETA funds in 1974. The program's legacy continues to this day through a variety of community-based organizations in the Bay Area.
Here in Philadelphia, where we moved in the mid-1980s, several of the city's key arts nonprofits were stabilized and expanded by CETA funding. Among them were the Painted Bride, the Mainline Arts Center, People's Light and Theater Company, Philadanco, the Joan Kerr Dance Company, and the Brandywine Print Center, which was the administrator of a community arts project that employed over 100 artists in total. Even the Philadelphia Museum of Art benefited by having 38 guards paid by CETA for almost 4 years. All across the country, CETA's impact continues. As Bill Cleveland, director of the Center for the Study of Art and Community, has said, quote, "To this day, there's CETA dust on many programs," and Bill is right. A prime example is the Women's Studio Workshop, which had 11 CETA positions and is still going strong. As Ann Kalmbach, executive director, described in an interview with us, that initial CETA funding enabled them to expand programming, resulting in their being awarded funding from other sources. And at times, the role CETA played was indirect. However, it was nonetheless impactful. In 1977, Jack Becker was hired to oversee 60 CETA artists for the Minneapolis Arts Commission. When CETA employment ended, Jack and some of the other CETA artists got together and founded the organization Forecast to promote public art.
Not unlike the New Deal, the various CETA arts projects nurtured some of their artists into high-profile careers. From our project, Ursula von Reytingsvard went on to become one of the most recognized sculptors in the US. And Dawood Bey went on to become one of the premier photographic artists, as well as a MacArthur Fellow. The 2023 MoMA exhibition just above Midtown, Changing Spaces, widely praised in the press, featured at least 16 artists who benefited from CETA. Among them were Willie Birch, Fred Wilson, David Hammonds, Sengen Goody, and Maren Hassinger. Tony Award-winning actor Bill Irwin is a CETA alumnus of San Francisco's Neighborhood Arts Project. And August Wilson, who you'll be hearing more about, was a CETA playwright at the Penumbra Theatre in St. Paul, founded by Lou Bellamy, who will be speaking soon. 6 artists who had been CETA funded are currently included in the Edges of Ailey exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art. The Ailey Company itself received CETA funding for a dance training program.
In 2011, a group of us artists from the Cultural Council Foundation project began researching and documenting CETA's impact on the arts and community. Until 2019, we focused primarily on New York City, but we've now expanded into a national network called the CETA Arts Legacy Project, a group that includes not only CETA artists, but former administrators and government officials. We aim to preserve CETA's history through presentations, exhibitions, academic panels, articles, interviews, and podcasts. We also serve as advisors to new artist support initiatives, such as those that Ted Berger will be speaking about. As well, we've been very fortunate to have linked up with supportive partners like the Living New Deal. In 2021, two other partner institutions in New York City, City Lore and the Artists Alliance, directed by Molly Garfinkel and Jody Weinberg, respectively, led in the effort to put on a well-researched two-venue exhibition on CETA and the arts in their Lower East Side galleries. We urge you to visit the CETA Arts Legacy Project's website, which is posted in the chat. One of the most important features of the CETA Arts website is a Google Drive research archive hosted by my college, Franklin and Marshall. It currently contains over 3,000 distinct digital assets, including documents, articles, photographs, oral histories, and videos. It is our intention that this archive serve as a resource for anyone wanting to learn more about, or possibly even write about, CETA and the arts. In fact, one carrot for a potential writer, so who's ever listening out there, we have a commitment from a friend of the Legacy Project, the art historian Lucy Lepard, to write a foreword for the first book to be published.
One recent accomplishment of the CETA Arts Legacy Project may seem rather minor on its face, but to us it represents a breakthrough. For the first time, to our knowledge, CETA's contribution to the arts has been acknowledged in a wall label that is part of a major museum exhibition. All too often, we've gone to featured shows of artists who benefited significantly from CETA positions early in their career, only to find CETA's role completely ignored by the curators. This happened with Ursula von Rydingsvart at the Philadelphia Museum, with Dawood Bey at the Whitney, and at the San Francisco Museum, the Jam exhibition at MoMA, and the Great Wall Show at LACMA. Given CETA's historical importance and its impact on the arts, these omissions astound us.
And now we turn it over to Ted Berger, who will talk further about how CETA was a major catalyst for the cultural sector's development and how it can serve as a model for new initiatives.
Thank you, Blaise, and thank you, Virginia. Good evening, everybody. First of all, let me apologize. Forgive me for using some notes. At my age, anything helps. I often say I don't do TED Talks, these tight, well-organized, short presentations. Rather, I often do TED films at the mouth. So you may need more of a hook to get me off. There's a lot to say, although some of it will be shortened because of what Blaise and Virginia just presented. I really want to thank the Living New Deal and Virginia and Blaise for asking me to participate in this series. I want to thank them for broadening the public's knowledge about CETA and for keeping the flame alive about its historic importance. CETA is an important demonstration of how the creative labor force plays a vital role, not only in cultural development, but with community advancement and in individual economic stability and overall workforce matters. I believe CETA is a pivotal catalyst in the evolution of arts and culture in cities throughout the country. It arrived at a crucial moment, like when organizations like Lou's Penumbra were coming into being. It shows how a jobs program which includes cultural workers, not only builds more sustainable support for the creative sector, but it's an essential component in America's workforce. Remember, the New York City CETA Artist Project is a bit like having a Proustian remembrance of things past. Or as Bill Cleveland just noted, it's like rubbing CETA dust out of your eyes. The project served as an extraordinary training ground for so many of us. It's had a profound influence, which I, for one, cannot forget. In my capacity as a fledgling member of the then fledgling New York Foundation for the Arts, I was one of the architects of the New York City CETA Artist Project, along with Sarah Gerritsen, whom you see on the screen, the executive director of the then extant Cultural Council Foundation, and the late Cheryl McClenny, the then assistant commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs in New York, then the newly formed city agency separate from the mayor's office. So it's an especially great pleasure to be part of this series when colleagues who helped shape and nurture the CETA arts movement throughout the country. You may have heard John's remarks in this series about how the CETA Artist Project started in San Francisco. Word spread like wildfire throughout the country about what John had created for the San Francisco Neighborhood Arts Project. CETA Arts projects then began sprouting up all over. We in New York watched in amazement as such initiatives expanded so quickly elsewhere, wondering how we in New York could ever begin to put together such a needed program, given the complexities of our arts and cultural communities and the complexities of the city itself. As you know, legislatively, CETA was structured very differently from WPA. Unlike WPA, which was centrally administered, CETA was decentralized. Its funding first allotted to state governments and then further allotted to local governments through departments of employment to support local initiatives. WPA and CETA were job programs for everyone. WPA came in the midst of a depression affecting everyone. CETA came at a time when we were a more segmented society and not everybody needed a job. In New York City, we had already been told very emphatically that the Department of Employment said that unless we were able to submit an application as a united voice of the arts community, it wouldn't even be considered. Good luck in herding cats in New York. So we began this critical community organizing effort, which, if you know anything about our cultural sector, ain't easy. We overcame all the siloed thinking you can imagine, by borough, by discipline, by whatever. And in late 77, united in one voice, New York City launched its CETA Artists Project. First, the 500 through 4 organizations, and then the largest one through the Cultural Council Foundation. And that was the largest artist support, artist jobs programs any place since WPA. Like WPA, CETA was open to all sectors, and the arts community nationally took full advantage of its eligibility. Arts projects within all of CETA were but a small percentage of the whole program. But this new multi-year funding to the arts meant 20,000 jobs, a major new source of support for what was primarily an emerging community. You need to understand how catalytic these jobs were in putting arts and culture on the map. especially for the emerging small and mid-sized organizations then developing because of the rise of public money for the arts. The New York State Council on the Arts, for example, was created in 1960. The NEA 5 years later. Like popcorn, state and local arts councils and organizations in all artistic disciplines were being established everywhere. The spirit of the 60s and its struggles for civil rights and justice and human equality and equity, I believe, shaped the vision of what we all hoped we in the cultural sector could do to give more people, arts and non-arts, access and opportunities for the many in culture, many for the first time. With a nickel and a dime, we all thought we could change the world, and we sure tried. More public support now meant there would be more funding available for new and different created voices. So new ideas and ways of understanding and listening to each other would surface to help the world. It allowed more people to see themselves as artists and valuable cultural workers. It allowed more people to see themselves as members of our audiences, as people entitled to be part of the cultural world. The building blocks of a national arts ecosystem, something we now take for granted, despite its current weaknesses and brokenness, was being created. CETA jobs helped to jumpstart many an organization, allowing dance and theater companies, for example, to hire their first-time administrators, permitting first-time program opportunities with artists, strengthening organizations and artist relationships with audiences, and more fully engaging diverse communities in many new and different neighborhoods. CETA helped to stabilize the economic fragility of our sector's workforce, historically dependent only on episodic income and few fringe benefits. As Blaise said, $10,000 then meant about $55,000 by today's standards, plus benefits. At this time, when equity and belonging are so critical, it's interesting to note that the New York City projects in general and the CCF artist projects in particular were as intentionally diverse and inclusive as we could conceive at that time, long before DEI initiatives had been developed. The very structure of the New York City CCF program, through the key participating intermediaries and subcontractors, along with its staffing, brilliantly led by Shelley Sloven, and certainly with the eligible artists selected by diverse panels, plus the placement partnerships, which were selected through a separate panel review, meant that the project as a whole and by design was going to be as representative as the whole city and the whole cultural community, as diverse as possible. One of the highlights participating artists in the program, remember, is the regular gatherings when people came together to get their paychecks. It was a reminder of what the city looked like, is what we wanted people to understand about the diverse composition of our cultural sector. It was community at work. It was democracy at work. Limited creative possibilities existed. Unlimited creative possibilities existed. One of the unique features of the New York City project, as Blaise indicated, was the fact, and the only one in the country to do this, is the fact that artists were paid for 4 days a week on community engagement projects and paid for the 5th day, imagine that, to be in their studio or to work on self-initiated projects. Many artists learned new skills, learned how to better communicate with people of all ages, learned they were part of a larger community of other artists and cultural workers, and learned how hard it is to have, how good it is to have a regular income you can count on. Some fundamental concepts underlie all of the CETA arts projects: that artists should be paid decently, regularly, and properly for their work, that they need to mitigate the struggles of what it means to live with the variables of economic income, and that artists and other cultural workers are invaluable assets to people everywhere and vital to civic engagement. Those of us who know about WPA and CETA understand what an essential workforce our creative community is in daily living and the advancement of society. So during the years after, when opportunities arose, there have been numerous advocacy efforts to recreate WPA or CETA-like programs on the local and national level. Recently, as a result of economic hardship impacting far too many, and to help in the recovery of communities from the pandemic, there have been more workforce initiatives than ever in the arts, supported with both public and private funding. Moreover, as the general workforce of the future is starting to resemble the gig economy of the cultural sector, there's a greater need to deal with the challenges of living as a gig worker. It is ironic that cultural workers provide a good laboratory for testing general low-cost, low-wage workforce needs and episodic income through efforts such as guaranteed income and the need for portable benefits, for example. How artists and other cultural workers better survive and thrive can provide a valuable case study for all workers in other sectors. How gig workers in general will survive and thrive can impact the workers in our sector's economic fragility. Recent research coming out of Creatives Rebuild, for example, is telling us what we've probably known all along, that artists are very responsible cultural citizens. They pay off debt. They make savings deposits. They pay bills. They choose work that works for them. Their well-being improves, and they have more space and time for caregiving for others. They can do this when they have a regular, dependable income stream. Just as we need to better understand forgotten programs like CETA, in my opinion, it's important to understand that some of our more recent initiatives in the arts are learning about our creative workforce. I've selected a list of projects I'm aware of that are happening in different parts of the country. Please understand this is not a definitive list, and it does not include programs that regularly employ working artists, such as those involved with arts and education. I do understand there's an effort, the Economic Security Project, that is keeping track of all the initiatives that are happening throughout the country. Just as I was privileged to be part of shaping the CETA Artists Project in New York City early in my career, I've been very privileged at a much later stage of my life to be asked to be a member of the think tank involved in the development of the recent program, Creatives Rebuild New York, a 2-year, $125 million initiative with principal funding from the Andrew Mellon Foundation as well as the Ford and Stavros Niarchos Foundation. CRNY is a major jobs program for 300 artists, as well as a guaranteed income initiative for 2,400 eligible artists. Sarah Calderon, the executive director of CRNY, recently announced that the program has launched the New York State Cash Alliance, a collaboration of arts and non-arts organizations advocating for a guaranteed income and aligned policies that expand access to unrestricted cash in New York State. Similar efforts are happening in other states. As a result, I've become aware of a number of other projects that I could believe are continuing what WPA and CETA started. The office, for example, based in New York and Massachusetts, has spearheaded an artist jobs program in 11 different states, now totaling 70 artists. There's been another effort in New York City with which I was involved, the New York City Artists Corps, which we tried to turn into a real jobs program, but ended up as a grants program instead for 3,000 artists receiving $5,000 grants to provide free programs to New Yorkers throughout the boroughs. There continue to be numerous efforts in different places to develop guaranteed income initiatives for artists and cultural workers and other workers as well. All artists who are eligible are covered by a guaranteed income program in Ireland. There's a growing trend, which I believe we in the arts sector need to pay attention. CETA in particular reminds us that as a sector concerned about the needs of our creative pool, we need to be more involved in working collaboratively with other sectors who are concerned about the needs of workers in their field. Far too often, I believe, we in arts and culture seem to work separately from others concerned with workforce matters. We also have more work to do within our own field about taking care of individuals who are central to the entire cultural system, makers and other individuals who work with makers. We must continue to work in allyship with non-arts efforts trying to respond to the changing nature of an expanding gig economy and the economic fragility of far too many people. Just as CETA has had impact on thousands and thousands, I believe, of individuals and communities, CETA has had a profound effect on my professional life. I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had to structure numerous economic opportunities for our field. But I know such efforts must build a movement. Yes, we need demonstration projects, but we need systemic change. So we need a younger generation whose voices and energies will continue the momentum to assure that creative labor is included in all conversations and advocacy about workforce in general. Change often demands patience. We're all in the long relay race, passing the baton from one generation to another. Our job is not necessarily to finish the race, but to do our damnedest to do what we can so the next generation can keep the cause moving. Additionally, I believe more work must be done within our own field to create a culture of care to help our constituency better understand artists shouldn't have to be dead to make a living. And just because you want to be considered an independent contractor doesn't release you from thinking of yourself as connected to the whole labor force. And just because funds are limited, it doesn't give permission to arts organizations and institutions to pay cultural workers as independent contractors rather than as employees they should be. We can't let the lessons of CETA continue to be forgotten. As we approach CETA's 50th anniversary, I'm so grateful to so many working to tell CETA's story. It's important to note the extraordinary documentation that was done for the New York City project and was used for the City Law Initiative. There's an important film made by Mark Levin about the New York project called The Federal Artist that I urge you to watch. Thank you, Living New Deal, for this series and for all of you who are doing what you can to remember and keep this conversation going. Thank you all who have developed and supported such initiatives in the past and now, and who must continue to do so in the future. And thank you, Blaise and Virginia, for remembering and for your determined caring. Thank you all for participating tonight. We all have a hell of a lot of work to do. So let's roll up our sleeves and get going. Thank you all. And now let me turn it over to Lou Bellamy.
Well, thank you, Ted, for turning it over to me, and thank you for your advocacy and your commitment and leadership in advocating for artists. I suppose that what I will bring to this conversation is sort of a where the rubber meets the road sort of example of what might happen when artists are given opportunity and resources to actualize their dreams and visions. Penumbra Theatre Company was founded to create productions that are artistically excellent, thought-provoking, relevant, and illuminate the human condition through the prism of the African American experience. Now, that mission found its grounding and began in 1976 when the executive director of the Hallie Q. Brown Community Center gave me a call. I was offered the position of the cultural arts director for the community center. Now, it isn't odd for Black art to mature, germinate, and so forth inside of community institutions like centers, churches, whatever, because many times those artists were locked out of traditional funding and ways of supporting their art. Hallie Q. Brown had just been awarded a grant under the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, and that grant was for $125,000. The previous artistic director at Hallie Q. Brown was leaving to pursue another career. And so my assignment would be to actualize the terms of that CETA grant, which was to help participants demonstrate marketable skills and help them move to unsubsidized jobs. A real challenge when one thinks of actors and the opportunities out there. The Hallie Q. Brown Community Center was in the St. Paul community since its founding in 1929. When this new building was erected in the Martin Luther King Center, it had a 160-seat lecture hall that we quickly turned into a rather well-equipped for the time theater space. After accepting the position, I hired 23 individuals who would then form the basis of the artistic company that is now the Penumbra Theatre Company. One of my early objectives was to demonstrate that there existed in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul a large enough population of experienced Black artists to maintain a professional company. From those beginnings emerged a company of mature artists who would do nothing short of revolutionize American theater. Penumbra Theater introduced playwright August Wilson by giving him his first professional production. Penumbra company members have gone on to lead the field and receive prestigious awards like the Jew Jamson Award, Pulitzer Prizes, Obie Awards, NAACP Awards, and Tonys, as well as countless community honors. Penumbra Theater is a professional theater inside of a community and is responsible and responsive to that community. Penumbra is in its 48th continuous year of production, and its longevity in the same spot, in the same building, in that community, and its evolution into the Penumbra Center for Racial Healing, I think gives positive testimony to the ability of a community to realize and establish its own institutions when given the resources to do so. In this case, Penumbra's $125,000 Comprehensive Employment and Training Act grant. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share. And I look forward to the conversation that I hope we're going to have at the end of this.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your stories with us, information about Penumbra and the arts nonprofit world. It's just wonderful to see all the images as well and be able to really imagine all of what is possible when federal funding is given to the arts, the sparks and then the lasting change. So I have a question for you, which I think we've touched on a little bit, and that is, the difference between public funding for the arts through the federal government and private funding for the arts. Like, can you speak to that a little bit? I think all of us agree it would be great if the federal government gave more. What do you think about the differences, and what would you like to see in terms of federal and state support, given what your experience has been like with CETA?
Who are you speaking to, Mary?
Everyone.
Whoever's brave enough to go first. I think if we are talking about needing to go to scale, you have to have public support. I think private support can be really effective in terms of risk taking and initial support when nobody else will give. The problem in the arts, as Lou so well pointed out, there have been many communities who haven't had access to either, or then, and still now, haven't had access to enough private support or public support in the arts. And so they've been struggling for decades about that. But if we need scale, you have to have, for example, Creatives Rebuild New York can do a lot about pilot efforts in guaranteed income. Building the statewide alliance is a strategy to get to wider public support. Building other statewide alliances will allow us to look at this from a geopolitical perspective that government responds to.
You know, also, private support tends to be project oriented. One of the wonderful things about the thing or result of those CETA funds is it was an amount of money that, in at least Penumbra's case, was given to an organization and allowed the organization to describe and create a way to use those funds. Theater remains to be a wonderful way of building community. W.E.B. Du Bois understood it, for instance, in the ways theater could organize people and so forth. You've got to have a board. You've got to have, you know, a financial officer, all those sorts of things that artists typically aren't equipped to handle. So these sorts of grants build community in a very special way around arts. And that's the worth of it that I see.
Well, I mean, what's complicated is if you have rent to pay, you don't care whether it's public money or private money,
Yeah,
giving you some cash.
yeah.
On the other hand, there is fear because of historical problems that government monies would impede what artists could say.
Mhm.
And there's similar fear that private monies could limit what artists can say.
Mhm.
So artists have to decide how they feel about that.
Well, Ted, I think those tensions are always going to be there. Something through our research that we really discovered with the initial CETA funding, you know, like Penumbra, and also I mentioned Women's Studio Workshop, the Painted Bride, because they had those CETA jobs for a couple of years, they were able to position themselves then to get the
Mhm.
private funding.
Mhm.
Previous
That's
to
exactly
that,
Yeah.
it's this thing where you don't have a track record, so the private funders won't give you any
Exactly.
money.
that was critically important because you had to have paid administrators full time for a year, and suddenly you were open for all kinds of other opportunities.
Mary, one other thing that Ginny and I talk about in reference to this kind of question, especially in terms of federal government funding, could apply maybe to state government funding as well, is artists can be incorporated into lots and lots of other things being done by the government, being funded by the government, not just broken out into their own project. When artists are broken out into their own project, they become vulnerable to all kinds of criticism of why is money being wasted on those creatives. You know, but when roles for artists are built into infrastructure projects, built into greening projects, built into educational projects, right? They become part of the fabric, and I think it's a real way to just make it a habit. You know, you create a program. Well, it's like percent for the arts. There should certainly be some work for artists
You
involved.
know, I find what you're saying so very practical. There's a part of me that rebels, and I was so impressed when Ted described the way you structured paying artists with one day for them to be inside of their own studio or creative time for themselves. There is a a time that an artist needs to be creative, to that looks to the businessman like loafing, but it's dreaming, and it's what is necessary to make this art and bring it to fruition. And we've got to learn
That's work.
somehow. Yes,
That's work.
yes.
Deserves to be paid.
I believe so. And we've got to do something to, it's pie in the sky, I understand it, but something to make people understand that that's valuable time and necessary time.
See, I think one of the significant differences and why I see this story is so important. I don't think WPA did a lot about art making in different communities, but you can't tell Penumbra's story with a WPA project the way Lou can tell it. CETA allowed a very different approach in terms of this integration
Mhm.
into community, into emerging organizations, and the hopes and dreams of a generation.
Yeah, and it brought community efforts to bear using art as a crucible. I mean, people would come in and get mad or argue about my selections or whatever, but at least they were involved and responsible. And that's a way of organizing and building community and equipping them with the tools they need to represent themselves.
I had a follow-up question here, and that is, do you think private support detracts from how culture people view the arts? And do you think it detracts at all from the health of communities? So I suppose, does privatization of the arts or private funding for the arts affect communities? I don't know if negatively is the right word, but maybe in terms of separations that public funding does. I'm trying to think what the question is getting to here. This is from our chat.
Well,
Um,
one thing that's certainly true is private funding doesn't necessarily have to adhere to Department of Labor regulations. You know, where Ted was talking about the federal money, the CETA money went to a variety of artists that might not have been positioned for private funding. And, you know, a good example is, you know, like getting an NEA grant, you know, yeah, when there were grants for individual artists, part of it was based on your work, but part of it was based on who was on the panel and who knew you.
Mhm.
You know, with CETA, first you had to qualify for the government rules. Then you went through, with our project, then you went through a professional evaluation. We had to go before a panel of artists. So it wasn't a situation where you were applying for a grant or an artist residency and a lot happens word of mouth and there are those types of connections. It was applying for a job. So, and it wasn't just out of the goodness of the administrators' hearts. It was government regulations. Yeah, Ted.
Um, I don't know how to respond to the question there, but let me try something. We can't afford only one part of this funding world to be involved. This is a very young country, and its public support of the arts is so low in comparison to the way other countries have done this, even some of the poorest countries in the world. We've only just begun. We are a young country, and we need the percentage of support arts and culture receives is so low that without the private support approach and without earned income, we'd be really more messed up than we are. And indeed, we need more private support. One of the fears these days that with so many other problems is that the private sector won't stay as involved as they have been in arts and culture. And it's a critical area. There's also a generational change happening there. And we need that involvement on both sides, public and private, to grow. Because in order to keep the public involved by being audience members and being able to afford to go to things, we need to keep ticket prices to be affordable. We need free programs. Without that three-legged stool of earned income, public and private sources, we're in very tough times.
I'll just say how wonderful it is to hear, because I think this is the running thread that's really powerful from the New Deal to CETA, is the understanding fundamentally at the level of pay and economic structure that the artist is a valuable worker and fundamental to American democracy and building a country and a society that, I've said this in the chats or the Q&A of every webinar here, of how you build an anti-fascist, community-oriented society that you communicate with people about. And you show them through the investments and through what the artists produce, the possibilities when you treat artists not as producers of luxury objects or events or something, but as foundational to the society. In terms of a community building and impact, passing that on to the next generation, can you speak at all about that? And I think that'll probably be our last question. The art,
I think that
the 21st century.
artists inside of a community always change the community. They always have an effect. Now, one will argue, depending upon your perspective, whether that effect is positive or negative, but they will make themselves known. It's important that artists be on all sorts of committees. I think they need to be part of the community at every juncture, everywhere people are meeting and talking. Artists bring a special perspective to the conversation. And it need not be the winning perspective, but it's necessary for the community to be all that it can be. I look at our community and I see the way businesses have developed around our theater, the way it has fostered all kinds of input, all kinds of changes. You see people quoting the plays in public discourse. The mayor's mother was opposite me in a production of Fences. So I mean, we're inside of that community in a very, very real way, helping to change it, shape it, and give it voice.
In the collaborative art forms, there's I think, a greater understanding about workers. There are more unions. Some people are allowed in, some people are not allowed in, but there are still unions thinking about its workforce. In other disciplines, that doesn't quite exist. There may be some unions, there may be guilds, etc. But I think there's more training that's needed to help artists understand their role in the labor force. That's one thing. The other is maybe even more complicated, or perhaps it's easier. Every person likes to think of him or herself as a creative maker somehow. And there's a disconnect that we often have with the civilian world. In in the athletic world, somehow people can see themselves on a continuum. There's Little League, there's amateur athletics, there's professional sports, there's superstar salaries. When you look at the arts and cultural and entertainment world, there are disconnects. Think of the artists themselves and many administrators who think about amateur theaters.
Yeah.
Okay. Think about how makers over here who are amateurs have some relationship to the makers of our cars in Detroit. And we have we have some general public understanding, in my opinion, about where we fit on the continuum, because everybody wants to think of him or herself as a creative human being. Somehow, people who knit are creative. People, people are making creative decisions about what they're wearing. They haven't had the training others have had, but they're part of this community.
That's so interesting. And I think it begins in kindergarten, perhaps even earlier, when we say, and now we'll have an hour of art. As if that's somehow separate from everything else that's been going on.
Or we say, and those who can do, and those who can't teach.
Yeah.
I just have to add one little anecdote to something you said, Ted, because when I taught for a year at Wayne State as a visitor, and the sculpture facility was in a warehouse that was shared by GM. So the thing is, we actually didn't even have a wall between us. It was just a heavy curtain. So all of the sculpture students, we used to be able to pull the curtain aside and watch them working on, they did clay models of cars back then. And they were gorgeous sculptures, but we were all working in the same building. So.
Mary, I wanted to come at it from just a slightly different point of view, since you're talking about the younger generations, right? I think a real part of what we want to do with our project is just tell young people, you can reach higher. There are bigger possibilities, there are better possibilities. You don't have to suffer in this fractured gig economy of individualism. And here's some good examples where people worked together, produced great things, made a decent living, and that could happen again, if we really wanted to.
Well, and I think that's actually a beautiful place to end in terms of thinking about the future and the hope that the New Deal and the CETA offer as models for the next generations. Hopefully soon for this one, and if not, fighting the good fight for the next. Thank you all so much for being here, sharing your wisdom with us, for your compelling and inspiring stories that I hope makes everyone who's here and everyone who will be watching this in advance of a in-person workshop that we'll be doing in San Francisco next year, many of whom will be younger art students, to think about what we can all do. My hope is this sort of gets the ball rolling, that keeps going and getting larger and larger in terms of awareness and appreciation as we go along. So thank you all so much for being with us. It's my honor to host all of our speakers tonight, and I'll see you soon for another Art Initiative webinar. Thank you to our donors. Take care and good night.
Goodbye. Thank you. Lovely to meet you all.
Lovely.